an update.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, good morning. I'm going to look for a little bit of help as I go through these comments. As you can probably tell, I'm recovering from one of those nasty little viruses. But there are a few things that I think are important to review with you today. First of all, I wanted to just give you a little assurance about the government shutdown. While it certainly is not a good thing, you should know that in week 2 now, there is little or no impact to TriMet, and there won't be for probably 2 to 3 months. If the shutdown were to occur 2 to 3 months, which I think we're going to have bigger problems than TriMet problems were that to occur, we would have some problems with the review and approval of grants. And as you know, we do receive on the order of $50 million of federal grants. Those come very lumpy in the year, so our cash flow balances allow us to live through that, so no effect on us. But if it delayed more than 2 to 3 months, there would be some effect. And the Portland-Milwaukee project, again, the only effect would be if the delay was more than 6 months. So we hope that, again, cooler heads prevail, a solution is found, and that the federal government gets its doors open again. You should also know, and Alan Leto will brief you on this a little bit further, related to the Columbia River Crossing project, we submitted the New Starts review, the application to the Federal Transit Administration, as they rank these projects nationally. It's a competitive program for the capital grants that they offer. We submitted that on schedule on Monday, but of course, other than acknowledgement on Monday, there is nobody there to look at them right now, and I think that's probably okay until the legislature chooses to act or not, because I think that is the significant last major hurdle for the project here at this point in time. Alan will update you on some of the other activities that have been underway. Speaking of bridges, I wanted to just note to you that next week we'll kick off our public process related to naming the Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail Bridge. The bridge is beginning to look like a bridge as those segments are continuing to be added to each of the legs of each of the 2 towers. We're very pleased to just note, as a sidelight, that the contractor is meeting his cycle times and doing those alternating cycles on each of the 2 segments of the bridge. So the schedule is looking as good as the form of the bridge as it's coming together. Recall that this is a unique bridge, carry buses, trains, cyclists, pedestrians, but no private vehicles, so it deserves a unique naming process. I wanted to just thank Board Member Stovall for serving on the naming committee. Chet Orloff, as you know, will be chairing that committee. And what happens starting next week is we'll be soliciting very broadly to the public their ideas for names. That will then come back to the committee. They'll create a short list of names out of that large process. We'll put that back out to the public. And then ultimately, a recommendation from the committee will come back to TriMet in early 2014, and the final name to be chosen in spring 2014. Anyway, that whole process is kicking off next week. I did also want to bring Shelley up, first of all, to help me on another little topic here, which is hours of service update. I wanted to particularly give kudos to our colleagues at the ATU for working with us on the hours of service issue. We continue to have a lot of discussions about that in terms of what the modifications might be moving forward. But we do have a policy in place, and Shelley's here to give you an update on what the first 3 months of data look like. Shelley?
Good morning, Mr. President and members of the board. I believe in August that Mr. Talbot visited with you to talk a little bit about how June and July had gone with hours of service. I'll give you just a quick recap to bring you sort of back into focus to this policy. In February of this year, we reached an agreement with ATU on an interim hours of service, pardon me, for bus operators that requires 9 hours off for extra board operators and 10 hours off for regular operators between one day's assignment and the next. This was, as you can imagine, a major shift for all of our operators and the station agents responsible for assigning the work assignments. Full implementation began in June, and now we've completed our June sign-up, and I'm pleased to say that we had pretty doggone close to 100% compliance. In June, you were told that out of 16,666 assignments, we had 16 violations of the policy. The majority of the violations were due to operators returning late to the garage. They would turn in a time slip that would later be entered in by our timekeeper, and the violation would show up after the fact. Most of those violations were 5 minutes or less, and the greatest violation in June was a 19-minute violation, which still provided 9 hours and 41 minutes of rest for our operator, which was very good. In July, we had 18,479 assignments that were made, and there were 11 hours of service violations. And again, 10 of those violations were from the operators running late and turning in time slips for a variety of reasons, which we want them to turn in time slips. They deserve to be paid for work that they do. 6 of those 11 violations were 9 minutes or less of achieving the desired required rest period. And only 1 violation was really significant, and that was a 43-minute time slip that resulted in the operator getting 9 hours and 17 minutes off instead of the required 10. So I bring that up because even when there is a violation, there is still a good period of rest that's taking place. So now on to August, which you haven't heard about. In August, there were 18,824 work assignments, and there were only 4 violations. 1 violation was an operator who filled in for someone who was sick on the road. He continued the service and arrived back at the garage 26 minutes late and received 9 hours and 34 minutes off between his assignments. The other 3 violations were again the result of operators who were running late, and they were anywhere from the 8 minutes I mentioned, or 8 minutes to the 26 minutes that I mentioned. In short, we continue to monitor this very, very closely. We pay attention every day to what's going on. When there is a violation, we contact the operator to make sure that they understand the hours of service policy and ask them to pay attention to that and interact with the station agent if they're not sure they're going to achieve the needed rest. And we have worked so closely. I can tell you that I have been nothing but impressed by the partnership and the collaboration that the management team and the ATU team have shared on this issue. It is an area where we are both mutually committed to making this work, and we're both committed to the safety of the service we put on the street. So we're going to continue that work, and the ultimate goal is to have a tentative agreement that will be forwarded to the bargaining table.
Good.
Any questions?
No, I like what I hear. Thank you. Very good. Yep. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yes.
Another quick topic, and Shelley, you can stick around for just a minute if you want, but on bus deliveries, I did want to just note you did, thank you again for approving the contract at the last board meeting that allows us to continue our rehabilitation of the fleet. Just to tell you where we are right now, we have 52 of this current order of 70, 52 buses in service. The rest should be in place and in service by the end of this month. The remainder of those 52 to 70, whatever that number is, will actually be all at the Merlot garage. Having seen a new bus on the line 43 last night for the first time, I know there's hope. So I think they're being very well received by our customers. And as I noted, we are engaging with our operators as well, and our safety committees related to the detailing of the layouts and the ergonomics of the bus itself. So that process continues, and that fine-tuning will continue. Related to the next contract, the production run for that will actually begin in March of 2014, and that will be either somewhere between 90 and 120 buses, and the difference there will be what timeline do we work with the manufacturer Gillig for the 30-foot bus replacements, and that sort of changes their production line, and so there's some complications with that we'll be working with them on. But nonetheless, a lot of new buses thanks to the investments that you've made, and we do appreciate that. I would also tell you that the reliability of those new fleet has been really substantially better than any that we've had in the past, and are really very high when you look at the fleet overall. So I think our customers will see a difference related to that. Yes, sir.
Is there one bus they make fit Arizona as well as Portland?
essentially. And we can do some customization, but it's relatively limited. In other words, it's a Chevrolet Malibu, but you can put chrome mirrors on it if you want. That
Well,
sort of thing.
I was just curious if we got any input from the field, from the bus operators.
When we get a new bus, the first thing that happens is a pilot bus is delivered in advance of production. We put the pilot bus out in the field, we take it to the garages, we have the operators provide input, the trainers, the mechanics, and then based on the feedback that we receive, that's our opportunity to work with the manufacturer to make any changes that TriMet desires, and that's a really critical time for us. That really is the last chance to change the chrome, the upholstery, the seat, and we take full advantage of that. I know Harry Supporta is very interested in making sure that the safety committee has the opportunity to really weigh in, because we're going to have these buses a long time, and we really do want them to meet all of our needs.
Thank you.
And then, I guess, sort of related to service quality, I wanted to bring Bob Nelson up to give a little report on the work that he's been doing related to reliable service. Again, I think, as I noted to you, I wanted Bob to provide you quarterly updates, and we're up to the quarter. So, Bob?
Okay, thank you, Neil. Mr. President, board members, good morning. You'll recall that in the August briefing, I discussed the notion of delivering high-quality service in the stated objective areas of vehicle reliability, service delivery, and operator support, and also on the development of key performance indicators that would help us understand progress or performance toward improving in those areas. Those objectives have been in place for a while, and methods to measure have been in place for a while. What we're doing now is reassessing those measurements, those indicators, to better understand, let's call it a value that aligns with the mission and vision of the agency. So is the indicator value-driven and helps us achieve that objective? In a sense, these key performance indicators help us understand a level of performance. So we're making progress on that. We have the good fortune of having a very talented service analysis group. Our transportation and maintenance divisions are actively engaged in reviewing this and using these indicators to improve decision-making and analysis. Now, we've always collected a lot of data, and we've done a good job on that. We have some powerful collection tools. What we're doing right now is, I would say, sharpening our focus on stuff so that as we report numbers against objectives, we want to more clearly define the gap. And the gap is rich for analysis. So we are doing more energy in that regard. And I want to just give you a couple of examples. Recently, we've experienced a modest uptick in bus collisions. So our analysts and our transportation personnel began looking at that. Anecdotally, we know that we've hired a lot of new drivers, and there's a tendency when you do that in big numbers to experience an increase in collisions, most of them being minor, meaning the safety envelope around the bus and the size of the vehicle is a little new to a new operator, and there's tendencies to have impacts of a minor nature, generally speaking. When we started drilling down into the numbers, we understood that our anecdotal observation about new drivers was reinforced by the numbers. That's true. But we also began to see that there was an increase in collisions in the bus operators in the 1 to 5 years of service category. So that got us thinking about some other things. And so we started looking at behavioral characteristics about that, meaning safety complaints, or operators who have a record or a pattern anyway of driving too fast, right? So we began to make correlations between those other attributes informing observations about operators at risk, meaning those that may have an inclination to have a future collision based on these other behavioral characteristics. So it's very good stuff. It's very interesting. Now, these are correlations, right? They're not precision. I mean, precision is more machinery. But these correlations are related to human behavior, and there's where it gets to be a little judgmental. But it's close enough to give us direction in terms of opportunities to intervene with operators and counsel and coach so that we can be more preventive in our approach to collisions. It's really good work. Secondly, in our rail equipment maintenance, we know that the main cause of disabled trains on our right-of-way have to do with propulsion. Now, propulsion is not a single failure. There's a variety of reasons that cause propulsion failures. Through our analysis and work with the REM, our Rail Equipment Maintenance Management Team, and technicians, we were able to identify the single most cause for those failures. We've identified the component, and now we're working on a redesign of that component that will give us longer durability and significantly improve reliability. That single one component accounted for 35% of our failures. So this is this notion of continuous improvement as we go along, looking at things, not being able to do it all at once, but take it step by step, incrementally, look at opportunities for improvement and put resource into it. We're going to be collecting this data on a quarterly basis going forward, and we'll be coming back to you with quarterly reports on these key performance indicators. Take any questions or comments?
Is that manufacturer's problem, or are you working with the manufacturer of the system?
In some respects, yes. In this component I'm referring to, it's something that we're working with a vendor to redesign the component for longer durability. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So last topic under the general manager report, I think, is the topic of non-union compensation. This fall, TriMet's beginning the use of a new performance appraisal system built into our Oracle database system for non-union employees. So managers and supervisors are now being trained on that system. Now, we always tell our managers and supervisors that it's important every day to let employees know how they're doing, but I think you would probably agree it's very incredibly important to at least do a formal review once a year. Now, as you can imagine, when you start talking about review, the topic of money comes up. And so I wanted to just note we're beginning to have those conversations internally, wanted to share some thoughts about that with the board, and I'll ask Randy to pursue, to explain what we're thinking.
Great. Good morning again. As we're talking about non-union compensation, we're reviewing the entire program, and we started that program actually several months ago in repricing the job. So every job that a person is in has a salary range associated with it, with a midpoint, minimum, and maximum. That process of making sure that the job range midpoints are where they're supposed to be, in other words, priced to the market average, hasn't been done in several years, hasn't been done since 2008. So we're about halfway or a little more than halfway through that process. And that doesn't have any, with some rare exceptions, doesn't have any impact upon individual salaries. It's just making sure that the salary ranges are appropriate to the market. What we found through that process is that about 60% of the jobs were priced appropriately to the market. And when I say the market, that means looking at where we recruit from and lose people to. For recruiting purposes, that sort of defines our hiring market. About 20% of the job ranges were too low and about 20% were too high. So we have, where the ranges were too high, we lowered them. Where they were too low, we raised them. And again, about 60% there was no change. And unless somebody fell below the minimum of that range, there was no change to incumbent salaries. So again, we're about halfway through that process. We have we have legal, operations, and capital projects to go. But as we started that process, we identified some other issues that were obstacles or are obstacles to our goal, which is to hire total compensation, make sure that we have total compensation that's sufficient to attract and retain a high-performing workforce. And so we're beginning and a good bit through the process of addressing those issues. But let me just step back a moment and describe the situation, the context that we're looking at. Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Randy, I didn't get a chance to review this document. I'm sorry, if you could switch the term non-union to non-represented, that would warm the cockles of my heart.
Okay. I'll try to do that, or just refer to them
Because
as administrative.
that term could be perceived as antagonistic.
Okay.
How's that?
Or administrative employees. Would that work as well?
Non-represented? Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yes, that'd be great.
So TriMet has a total workforce of about 2,500 employees, and of that, there are about 430 administrative employees, and the average salary for that group is $76,482. A large number of those administrative jobs are non-management jobs. In other words, they're non-exempt jobs and receive overtime. And I think that's important to remember. About 20% are non-exempt hourly paid employees, and they have an annual base wage of about $43,000. And about 106 of those non-represented employees or administrative employees make less than the average or the typical 15-year bus operator. I just want to put that in context because it's important to note that a large number of our administrative employees are non-exempt family wage level jobs. These non-union or administrative employees are broken down into three different total compensation tiers. And when we talk about total compensation, we're talking about both salary, benefits as an active employee, benefits eligibility as a retired employee, leaves, and other forms of indirect compensation. And as we have been looking at this administrative group, we have found that they vary substantially based on date of hire and in two primary ways: the retiree health benefits for which they're eligible and the pension benefits for which they're eligible. And again, that eligibility is based on date of hire. So we've already recognized in our HR policies that there are three tiers. Tier 1 is a group that was hired before April 27th, 2003, and the characteristics of that group, 47% of them, or 203, are there's 203 out of the total that are in that group. Their comp ratio, and when I refer to comp ratio, that's simply the incumbent salary divided by the salary range midpoint. So in the aggregate, that group is pretty much at the market average, again, assuming that the salary ranges are correct, and we're in that process, as I mentioned, of going through and verifying that. But their comp ratio is pretty close to 100%, meaning at the salary range midpoint. They qualify for retiree health care and an actuarial reduced defined benefit pension at age 55 with 5 years of service, and then a full benefit at age 62. We've calculated that beginning at with implemented changes for January 2014, that the present value of that retiree health is about $130,000 for a single employee and about $260,000 for a retiree and spouse, who have retiree benefits equal to the active employees through their retirement life. And the value of that Tier 1 defined benefit plan is equal to about 6% or more of current year salary per year than what I'll describe as the Tier 2 and Tier 3. So those retirement health benefits and pension benefits have significant value. Then there's the second tier, a group hired from April 27th through April 27th, 2003 to April 30th, 2009. That comprises about 25% of the administrative workforce. Their compa ratio, or salary divided by midpoint, is 95%, with an average salary of $74,249. This group has to be 55 and have 10 instead of 5 years of service for the retiree health care benefit, and there's no eligibility for the pension plan. They are eligible for the 401A 457 plan, which is a 401K type plan, into which TriMet contributes 8% of compensation, and there's no employee match for that contribution, and that has 36-month cliff vesting of credited service. So that's Tier 2. And then finally, the Tier 3 employees were hired after May 1st, 2009. That's about 28% of the current workforce. That is the group that is growing. So as the Tier 1 and Tier 2 our employees are beginning to retire, that 28% or 120 employees, that's the group that's beginning to grow. Their compa ratio is 92% with an average salary of $64,629. They have participated in the 401A plan, but they are not eligible for retiree health that is subsidized by TriMet. They can have it, but they would pay 100% of the premiums, and those premiums are so expensive that essentially nobody would take that. So those are the three groups. And what we've identified associated with those three groups is that the Tier 1 and Tier 2 have a total compensation package because of the retiree health care benefits and or the pension, and that has kept turnover historically low at TriMet for the administrative group. And when I say low, including retirements, that historically has been in the 5 to 6% range. That's a little higher than the represented group, who has turnover, including retirements, historically of the 2 to 4% range, but still pretty low. And that compares to state and local government, historically 9.5 to 10%, and the state of Oregon employees of 7.3% in the year 2010. That non-union group has had a 3.5-year merit freeze until July 2012, when there was a 3% compensation adjustment on average, varied by individual, and there aren't any fiscal 2014 merit increases planned. So since 2006, the average annual increase for non-union non-represented employees has been about 1.7% compared to the represented employees of about 2.6%. What we've also begin to see is that as we have had an improved economy, both public and private sector employees are resuming their normal merit and merit programs. Well, we have continued to have constrained increases due to budget problems. The problem that all of this contextual information represents is that, as I said, Tier 1 and 2 employees are beginning to retire through the two pivots that I mentioned at two different points of time: removal of eligibility for retiree benefits and removal of eligibility for the pension plan. The benefits of the Tier 3 employees are resembling what the market is. And as I mentioned, their direct compensation, their compa ratio, is less than the market. And although they are less tenured with TriMet, their being less tenured with TriMet does not mean that they are necessarily less experienced than the current employees. They could have been doing their job at some other organization for 20 years and come to TriMet more recently and still be in that Tier 3, and that compa ratio is still noticeably below the market average. And as those Tier 3 employees begin to replace retiring Tier 1 and 2, we become exposed to the market for competition for talent that is largely based on direct salary, and yet we have constrained merit increases, and they're already below market, and so we are perceiving a flight risk, and that flight risk is already manifesting itself in the numbers. I mentioned our turnover has been historically low, but it jumped from 6-something% to over 11% in the current year for that non-represented group, and that's a 77% increase and 63% or so increase for voluntary separations, in other words, resignations. So the numbers are beginning to reflect that flight risk. So again, just looking at that Tier 3 group whose benefits are at the market and whose compensation is not at the market average, what they're seeing in terms of annual progression, and in their salaries, and they're very sensitive to that, again, because their benefits don't have the stickiness to TriMet that it used to have. They have seen a market in 2009 where the market moved at 1.78%. Those that were on board had a 3.8%, but 2010-11 were 0% at TriMet, where the market was still moving at 2%. To 2.3%. 2012, the market moved at 2.25%. We did have that 3% adjustment. 2013, the market, again, resuming its normal levels or near normal levels, 2.53%. TriMet is at 0%. And we're expecting, based on the large compensation house projections, that the market merit increases will be at 2.8 to 3.0%, and we're at 0%. So our challenge in this environment is to look at that non-represented compensation program and build a sustainable market-based total comp program that addresses that asymmetrical difference in total compensation between the Tier 1 and 2 and on one hand and the Tier 3 on the other, and continues to ensure that we can attract and retain a high caliber workforce. So that's the challenge that we're working on now, and describes the work that we've done to make sure that the ranges are at the market. So with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Perhaps I just might note that again, this is just a layout of the problem and the way we're starting to look at it, which is related to tiers. Any proposal will come back to you for your consideration, and obviously any financial commitment will come back to you for your consideration in public session. But we wanted to get your feedback on the way we're looking at it in this sort of tiered fashion, and see what thoughts you might have.
Please.
Randy, what is our definition of the market? I mean, it's a difficult, as I see it, it's a difficult description to place, because ultimately we're a public sector agency, but yet the talent that we are looking to recruit and retain aren't necessarily public sector talent. I mean,
Right.
They can go to. I mean, we've got everything from high tech, all the way up through just HR, management, other type of leadership
Right.
Talents that we require and that we need. And so when we when we talk about represented positions and we compare ourselves to other agencies, I mean, we can compare drivers to drivers. But when we start talking about this level of talent, it gets a lot more difficult to describe kind of what our market is, but we reference it quite a bit in this presentation.
That's a great question, and it actually differs by position. So in the broad, we use market as shorthand, but really when you're establishing your rates, what you're concerned about is who you're losing talent to, typically, and who you're going to recruit from, typically. And so that sort of generally defines the market, and that varies by position. So some positions, such as the general manager position, for example, that would be a national search. And it would quite probably include transit agencies, but it might include other entities, for example, like the Port of Portland would be the type of entity, or a utility might also be the type of entity that would recruit from. So when we price that job, we look at who we're likely to recruit from and who we've lost talent to. For an operations job, we would probably weight more heavily other transit, public transit entities. But for a job like mine, for example, there's no necessity to hire from the transit industry. We would include the transit weightings, but we'd also look at both other public and private. So typically for the director level jobs, as a general rule, we'll weight transit, public transit at about 50% weighting, and then we'll look at the other entities that we would recruit from. So it varies by position.
So as we look at the market-based group that is on page 10 of the slide deck, and we see the numbers going from 2009 at 1.78 to between 2.8 and 3, and the current period, 2014, what do those numbers represent?
Yeah, those numbers are general. So across the country, looking at merit packages, and when I say merit packages, those numbers do not include promotional increases, so just the merit. And those are more broad numbers. We also look pinpoint. There's a recent survey out by the MBL Group, a little shout out to them, that looks at Oregon and the Oregon area and then Portland, and they have the same numbers, about 2.9 to 3%. But the numbers that we're talking about there are the national, Aon, Hewitt, Mercer, Connexa, ERI. They all put out projections for the market in the coming year based on working with their clients, and that's where they're coming in on a broad public and private sector. We also make calls to the other public sector employers in Oregon and specifically around Portland in assessing where that market is moving.
Okay, one more question. So on page 8, in our packet, page 8, the bullet point is since 2006, average annual salaries increase for non-represented employees has been 1.7 compared to represented employees of 2.6. Now, the time period there is from since 2006 till current?
Yes.
So I'm just trying to match those numbers up. So the non-represented hasn't seen, I mean, we saw a 3.8% increase back in 2009, and then no increases and then a 3%. And so to see that average come out, that some people may not think it's close, but relatively close, 1.7 compared to 2.6. But then, and I'm assuming the represented employees have received increases throughout this time period.
Until this last year, yes.
Until this last year, and so from 2006, that would I would assume then that pre-2009, non-represented were receiving higher percentages of increases up until 2009 to be able to relatively come back close, because ultimately we've got a couple of years where there's no increases.
Right, they were in the mid 3% range in 2006-07 timeframe. There was also there was a compensation study that was done in that time period where there were some merit increases, and then there was some catch up with the market that market adjustments, we'll call them, that were implemented as well. So yes, they were in the mid 3s, and that's what the market was at that time. In the mid 3 to 4% was where market increases were in that point in time. So that's correct. And that 2.6, the represented employees, they have 3 to 5%. 2.6 also takes into account some timing of when people were coming and going. So these were actual increases. The contract provided for a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5%, and between those two extremes, they were based on CPI, but where there were timing differences when we were taking the snapshots and the numbers, that reduces the actual average down to 2.6.
Thank you.
Questions down here?
I'm all right. Go ahead, John.
No, I'm good.
I'm good. Doctor?
I guess then I would just have a couple questions. I guess that slide up there, I think, is just tells it like it is. I think, you know, the board's desire is to have a sustainable, market-based total compensation program, you know, for all of our employees, frankly. And we wanted to ensure that we can attract and retain and develop a diverse, highly skilled workforce at an appropriate cost. So obviously the goals, the objectives, the challenge, but it's also, I think, where we want to go in things. When I look at the turnovers, I do get a bit concerned. I don't know whether, I assume you have breakdowns by the tiers in terms of
Yes.
the turnovers?
Yes.
My assumption would be that the tier 3 the turnovers are much higher than the tier 1 and tier 2.
Yeah, and a similar concern I have about Tier 3 are the younger Tier 2,
Yeah.
who have a long way before they realize that, make manifest that retiree benefit, medical benefit that they're eligible for. So their calculus is a little bit different than the Tier 1. So I would kind of sort of lump that group. We've got a number of people who are in their 40s at Tier 2, kind of a fair tenure with TriMet, but still quite a while until retirement. I think that there's a flight risk associated with that group as well.
Yeah, but in aggregate, it's 11.45% last year. Just to put that into perspective, when I look at the represented employees who have the system much closer to the tier 1s, what's the employee turnover?
Yeah,
on-
2 to 4%, including retirements.
Okay,
Very low.
yeah.
Would some of this be part of the light rail job coming? You can see the end of 2015 going out to Oregon City?
And affecting turnover?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
The uncertainty about CRC.
No.
I think it is true that we probably do have some of those issues, but I don't think, in looking back, that the timeline would have affected those employees' view as much as,
Going
frankly, we
forward.
have more risk going forward as we
Right.
get closer to completion. And I would tell you that is a significant business risk that we face, is that we always need the talent for the strong finish, and sort of making sure that we have it there is really important. And so there are some challenges associated with that, too.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, again, I don't know what you're looking for, but obviously this is understanding of the issue. I think it does provide a good snapshot of what we're facing. Also, in terms of the years where we've held the line at 0 increases for the non-represented employees, I think you're doing exactly what we need to do to make sure that we do have a system that can recruit and retain a quality workforce. So I suspect we'll have further discussions about this as you come up with some recommendations. But I think you framed the issue. I think it's exactly the kind of things that management should be looking at for both represented and non-represented.
Great.
So look forward to the
Yeah,
further
appreciate that.
discussions as we get into the budgets. And
Exactly. We'll integrate that into the budget discussion over the next year, and so we'll be back to you with further on that.
Okay. Anything else, members here? Okay, thank you. All right.
Yeah, so one last item, which is just to give you a little bit of preview of the retreat that we have planned on the 17th in the afternoon at the University of Oregon in Old Town. I think we've got a very important and engaging agenda. We're going to have a little kickoff from Portland Mayor Charlie Hales, who will talk a little bit about his experiences with public transit, both as a mayor, but also as a consultant over the last few years, and his thoughts about TriMet and the role of public transit in the city's future. And then take up some hopefully very strong conversations about the strategic financial plan. I know Board Member Stovall will touch on that here in a moment. And then also look at some of the other challenges, the short-term challenges we have related to what we fund and what we don't fund as we sort of move ahead related to the both service and fare policy. So it's a full discussion. A lot of, we're preparing the staff presentations to be very short and crisp so that you have a lot of time to discuss. But we do want to do little presentations to sort of kick off the topics and hopefully provide you some of the answers to the questions that you've been asking over the last few months. So with that, I'll conclude my comments.
Great. And a time on that? Did you mention that?
So it's noon to 5.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be wearing
Did I get
my
it right?
purple and gold.
Okay, very good, thank you.
All right, thank you. So we're ready to move on then. The next item is continued discussion of our strategic financial plan, and Craig Prosser and Travis Stovall were to tag team this, but Craig is a bit under the weather today, so Travis, it's yours.
Excellent. Well, I will warn you up front that the comments that I have based on the budget task force from last week are actually quite lengthy, so you'll have to bear with me as we step through this. But Director Prosser is actually the chair of the Finance Committee that I get to have the opportunity to serve on, and so he usually is leading this task, but I get to today. So Director Prosser and I had the opportunity to actually meet with the General Manager's Budget Task Force last week, and the primary topic was, of course, the strategic financial plan. And in their last report, the Budget Task Force actually recommended that that TriMet create a financial plan to guide budget and create transparencies. So they said that the plan should reflect the region's expectations for transit growth, which we did have an opportunity to discuss and talk about, kind of that big picture concept of, and part of that is I'm trying to think of the actual initiative that's going on right now in regards to the environment, and it's sad that I can't remember the exact name. Communities, climate smart communities. I appreciate that. That's how we all work together. Thank you. I appreciate that. Climate smart communities, and the impact on transit and how it's going to place some requirements that we may or may not be prepared for. So that was something that came up during that discussion, and they described this as a roadmap of financial stability. And so we wanted to get their feedback and talk about elements of the plan, which they actually were able to give us a lot of input and a lot of insight. And there were two key major kind of takeaways and themes that this budget task force actually delivered to us. And they said it was important to have guidelines for financial decision making, especially given the expectation for transit growth and the trade-offs that may or may not need to happen depending on what it looks like in the coming years. And those guidelines should be easily understood, which is sometimes not something that happens within the financial world. I am actually a finance person by training, finance and accounting, heavy on the finance side, but minor in the accounting side of life. And sometimes it is difficult to translate the financial speak that we sometimes do. But they said that it needs to be easily understood, high level, in a living document that's revisited and modified continuously as ongoing. The conversation was actually very helpful in thinking about how to proceed. And some of the additional comments that they gave us, and this goes along with some of the questions that we've posed so far, and we've posed it to the public, we're posing it to the board for further discussion, because the questions are short in nature, but they're long in deliberation and dialogue once you start to get into it. And it's things that are like, what should be the appropriate size of a reserve balance and the criteria for how those funds are used. That has, again, it's a small statement, but something that has large impacts. And how should we accommodate unforeseen costs like increases in fuel? Somebody just the other day said that they remember when fuel was 80 cents a gallon. I don't remember that. I'm kidding. I tried to make myself sound a whole lot younger than I am. But I do remember pulling into the gas station and my folks paying 75 cents a gallon. I mean, I was 2, but I remember. What level of confidence we have that we are going to be able to get our cost in line was a big question that they have. As we look to the future and as we look to 2017, 2018, we already know what the trajectory of our cost and our revenue lines begin to cross, and those are challenges. And we also have some bigger challenges when we start talking about, the OPEB and the unfunded liabilities that we know exist and are actually being added to our balance sheet every single year. We just heard that at our last board meeting when we got the audit. Understanding new resumes, understanding new revenues, and will they ultimately be needed to meet demand, and costs needed to contain, how do we contain those costs? The importance of addressing transit equity, lift cost, and fare and policy and pricing in general is a big comment that they made. I mean, how do we make sure that we're creating this balance between those competing demands? So as the board starts to take a look at these, I think the board can begin to set the guidelines that